On Easter Sunday, when most families gather around the table to laugh, to pray, and to break bread together, mine was already breaking apart in ways no one could see. You would think that after raising a son, giving up your career, and pouring decades of your life into cooking every meal and keeping every tradition alive, there would be a chair at the table that could never be taken from you. But this Easter, my chair felt like it was disappearing right under me. My daughter-in-law wanted to run the show. My son kept quiet to keep the peace, and I stood there holding my old recipe book, the one with my late husband's handwriting in the margins, wondering if anyone even remembered how many years I stayed up late just to make their favorite dishes. That's how betrayal creeps in, not with a loud bang, but with the soft sound of being overlooked. I used to believe that love would always be remembered if you gave enough of it. For most of my life, I carried that belief like a candle, even when the flame flickered low. When I was younger, I left behind a job I loved, working at a local library, because my husband and I decided our son needed me at home. I told myself it wasn't really a sacrifice, but deep down, I knew it was. My days became filled with laundry, meals, grocery lists, and late nights waiting up to sew his Boy Scout patches on just right. I thought those things mattered. I thought they would stay in someone's memory. Every holiday, I was the one who carried the weight of tradition. Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving turkeys, 4th of July barbecues, all of them came through my hands with recipes my mother taught me, and Easter, that was my favorite. The honey-glazed ham, creamy mashed potatoes, fresh rolls warming in the oven, and my special gravy that even my picky grandson licked off his spoon. Easter wasn't just food, it was me putting my heart on a plate, year after year. But as years went on, things shifted. My son grew up, got married, and suddenly the kitchen, the place that used to be my stage, my comfort, my domain, was no longer mine. My daughter-in-law, Trang, wanted to take over. She had a new kitchen, stainless steel appliances, bright counters, everything that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. And with that kitchen came a new confidence, a subtle way of telling me, "Your time is over." I smiled and stepped back, but it hurt. I can still hear the way she said it last year. "Oh, Mom, why don't you just sit and relax? You've worked hard enough." But it didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like dismissal, as if everything I had done was nothing more than old news. Still, I kept cooking. I kept showing up. I kept bringing my gravy and my rolls, even if no one said thank you. That's what mothers do, right? We give. We believe that one day someone will notice. The truth is, though, that kind of giving has a cost. There were dreams I let go of. I loved to paint once. I even took classes, bought brushes and canvases, filled a whole closet with supplies. But when bills piled up and time ran thin, the brushes were put away, gathering dust, while I chose to spend those hours ironing shirts and clipping coupons. I told myself, one day, when the kids are older, when life is calmer, I'll paint again. That day never came. And the nights? I can't count how many times I stayed awake after everyone was asleep, planning meals, wrapping gifts, fixing mistakes no one would ever know about. I once spent a whole night baking cupcakes for my son's school fundraiser because I didn't want him to feel left out. He came home the next day, tossed his backpack on the floor, and said, "They were fine. That was it, just fine." No hug, no thank you. But I still smiled and told him I was glad. All of these memories, these quiet sacrifices, they stack up inside you like bricks. One or two doesn't weigh much, but after 40 years, it becomes a wall around your heart. This Easter, as I stood in Trang's spotless kitchen, clutching my recipe book with my husband's notes scribbled in the margins, I felt that wall pressing in. She was already filming little clips for social media, showing the ham in the oven, the table with pastel decorations, and I realized my name wouldn't be in that story at all. I wasn't the one she wanted to show. And here's the thing. People talk about revenge story videos online, those dramatic tales where someone finally gets back at the one who hurt them. But in real life, revenge doesn't always come with fireworks or shouting. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a mother watching her place at the table being erased and deciding deep inside, enough. That's where my story begins, not with rage, but with silence. Not with a fight, but with a woman realizing that years of sacrifice can't be paid back by people who never saw the value in the first place. They won't see it. And maybe, just maybe, I've been waiting for the wrong recognition all along. As the smell of roasted ham filled the house, as children laughed in the yard hunting for pastel eggs, I opened my recipe book one more time, tracing the handwriting on a faded page. My husband had written, "Don't forget the bay leaf." Such a small note, but it felt like a hand reaching across time to remind me that someone once noticed, someone once cared. I looked at the bay leaf, held it between my fingers, and smiled. I wasn't sure yet what was coming, but deep down, I knew this Easter would be different. This was the Easter I would stop waiting to be remembered and start remembering myself. It started small, like a chill draft sneaking through a cracked window. You don't notice it right away, but over time, you feel it in your bones. That's what happened with my son and his wife. The warmth that used to be in our conversations slowly faded, replaced with something sharper, something distant. I remember calling my son a few weeks before Easter just to check in, just to ask if they needed me to bring anything for the dinner. He answered quickly, his voice rushed, "Mom, don't worry about it. Trang has everything covered." Then silence. No follow-up, no, "How are you doing?" Just an awkward pause that made me feel like I had called the wrong number. And when I saw them in person, it wasn't much better. Trang barely looked up from her phone. When I asked her how work was going, she gave me a flat, "Fine," and went right back to scrolling. My son tried to smooth things over, quickly changing the subject to sports or the weather, as if my questions were burdensome. I used to know everything about his life. Now, I felt like a stranger waiting for scraps of conversation. What hurt most wasn't the words, it was the tone. Short, clipped, like every answer was a closed door. When I asked about their new kitchen remodel, hoping to show interest, Trang smiled without looking at me and said, "Oh, we just wanted something more modern. Not like the old style." That word, old, stung more than she realized, maybe more than she cared to realize. There's a certain way someone can dismiss you without saying it outright. A glance, a shrug, a laugh at the wrong moment. Those things cut deeper than insults. I noticed it every time I brought food over. She would set my casserole dish on the counter like it was an afterthought, while her store-bought cupcakes got displayed front and center. And my son? He said nothing. He just let it happen. Sometimes silence hurts more than words, and maybe you've felt this too. That moment when you realize the people you gave your life to are slowly pushing you out of their circle. It's like being in a photo and watching yourself fade until you're no longer in the frame. I wonder, have you ever been in that situation? If you have, leave me a comment, because I know I'm not the only one who's felt invisible at my own family's table. Back to that Easter. There was this one afternoon before the big dinner. I stopped by their house to drop off a few things. I had baked fresh rolls, the kind my grandson always loved. The smell filled their kitchen, warm and sweet. I set them down gently, waiting for someone to notice. Trang glanced at them and said, "Oh, you didn't have to do that. We already bought bread." Then she slid the bag of store bread onto the counter right in front of mine. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, my heart sank. She didn't see the hours I spent kneading, letting the dough rise, shaping each roll with care. She only saw something unnecessary, and my son. He walked in, kissed her on the cheek, and said, "Smells good, babe." He wasn't talking about my rolls. He didn't even look at them. It's a funny thing, the way love gets taken for granted. When my son was a boy, he would beg me to make those very rolls. I'd pull them out of the oven, and he'd eat 3 in one sitting, butter melting down his fingers. He'd grin at me with his mouth full, saying, "You're the best, Mom." Now, he couldn't even recognize the smell of his own childhood. That night, I lay awake replaying every small slight. Each one by itself might not mean much, but together they felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I kept asking myself, did I do something wrong? Did I love too much? Or is it that my love has simply expired in their eyes? It's painful to admit, but I started to feel like a guest in my own family, and worse than that, a guest who wasn't even welcome. The coldness grew even sharper as Easter approached. On the group chat where we used to plan the menu together, Trang took over completely. She posted lists, schedules, decorations, all with cheerful emojis that somehow felt like little daggers. My name wasn't mentioned once, not even for the gravy, which had always been my contribution. It was as if my role had been erased, like chalk washed off the sidewalk after a rain. And I realized something. Being ignored can hurt just as much as being insulted, because at least an insult acknowledges you exist. Silence? Silence makes you wonder if you were ever there at all. By the time Easter Sunday finally came, I felt like an outsider stepping into their world. The pastel decorations, the glossy table settings, the carefully arranged dishes, all of it looked picture perfect. But underneath, I could feel the frost in every interaction. As I stood there, holding my old recipe book against my chest, I wondered if they even noticed. Did they remember the years I spent creating these traditions? Or had those memories been replaced by stainless steel appliances and Instagram-ready meals? One thing was certain. The warmth I had poured into every holiday, every plate of food, every late-night effort, it wasn't being returned, not anymore. And in that moment, deep in my heart, I began to understand. This Easter would not be like the ones before. This time, I would not wait quietly, hoping someone would remember my worth. Something inside me was shifting, slowly but surely. The coldness that surrounded me was about to meet a different kind of silence, one that came with boundaries, not begging. Because there's only so long a heart can stand in the cold before it learns how to keep itself warm. Easter morning came with sunshine that felt almost cruel, like the weather itself had no idea what kind of storm was waiting inside me. The kids ran around the yard hunting for pastel-colored eggs, their laughter floating through the air. From the outside, it looked like the picture of a happy family, but inside that house, where the table was set with perfect china and gold-trimmed napkins, something else was happening. Something small but sharp enough to cut through 40 years of sacrifice. When we all gathered at the table, my daughter-in-law, Trang, took her seat at the head, smiling for photos, her phone propped up to catch every angle. She wanted to broadcast the image of a perfect Easter dinner to her friends online. I sat quietly, my recipe book tucked under my arm, even though nobody asked for it. I had brought the gravy, the one I've made every Easter since my son was little. But as the dishes were passed around, Trang leaned forward and said loudly, "Oh, we decided to do something different this year. I made my own version, less heavy, more modern." She gestured toward a bowl in front of her, sleek and new, while the bowl I had carried in sat untouched near the edge of the counter. My heart froze. I wanted to ask why, but the words stuck in my throat. My gravy, the one that had been requested by my husband every year until the day he died, the one my son used to beg for when he was a boy, was sitting off to the side like it didn't belong. It wasn't just the gravy, it was what came next. One of Trang's friends, someone I barely knew, asked her, "How did you learn to cook like this?" And without missing a beat, Trang smiled and said, "Oh, I just figured it out myself. I've always been self-taught." The table laughed, nodded, complimented her on her talent. And I sat there remembering the afternoons I spent showing her how to roast vegetables without drying them out, the evenings I explained how a bay leaf changes the depth of a sauce, The mornings I let her borrow my spice jars because she said she didn't have the right seasonings yet. Not once did she mention me, not even a glance in my direction. It was as if those years of guidance had been erased, as if I'd never played a part in shaping the food that now earned her praise. Then came the moment that cut deepest. My son, my only child, the boy I once stayed up nights nursing through fevers, the boy I fed rolls and gravy until his little belly was full. He raised his glass and said, "Here's to Trang. She's really built this family up, done it all on her own. I don't know what we'd do without her." Those words hit me like a blow. Done it all on her own. My chest ached as though something inside me cracked open. I looked around, expecting someone to correct him, to say, "But your mother, she's the reason we're here." No one did. They just clinked their glasses and took another bite. I felt invisible. Worse than invisible. I felt erased. Do you know what it's like to hear your life's work dismissed in a single toast? To hear she did it all when you were the one who gave up everything to make sure there was something to build on? It doesn't feel like anger at first. It feels like falling into a hole where no one even notices you've slipped away. I tried to hold my composure. I reached for my napkin, dabbed at my lips, kept my hands from shaking. But inside, I was screaming. I thought of the nights I stayed awake baking cupcakes, sewing costumes, clipping coupons to save for holiday dinners. I thought of the countless Easters where I carried the whole meal on my shoulders while everyone else just showed up to eat. And now here I was, not just forgotten, but denied. The cruelest part wasn't even Trang's words. It wasn't even my son's toast. It was the look in their eyes when they glanced past me, a look that said, "Your time is over. You don't matter here." After dinner, while everyone was taking photos by the table, I slipped into the kitchen to collect myself. That's when I saw it. Trang, laughing with her phone still recording, had picked up my gravy bowl. I watched as she poured salt straight into it, stirring quickly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one noticed. She caught my eye for a second, just a second, and smirked. Then she set it back down, untouched. That was her game. She didn't just want to replace me. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted people to taste my dish, spit it out, and laugh about how the old ways weren't good enough anymore. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. She had taken my love, my legacy, and twisted it into a weapon against me. At that moment, I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. No amount of giving, no amount of sacrifice was ever going to be enough for them. I could cook 100 meals, pour out 1,000 acts of love, and it would never buy me the respect I thought was waiting. Because the truth is, they had already decided I wasn't worth remembering, and that realization, that cruel denial of everything I had built, was the spark. A small, quiet flame inside me whispered, "Stop waiting to be seen. Stop begging to be remembered. Your worth is not theirs to give." As laughter echoed from the dining room, I placed the lid gently back on my recipe book, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like cooking anymore. I felt like leaving. This was no longer just about Easter. This was about a lifetime of love being washed away in a single afternoon. And I knew, in that silence, that nothing would ever be the same. If cruel denial feels like someone erasing your name from a family tree, then humiliation feels like being shoved off the branch while everyone else laughs. That Easter dinner wasn't just about words anymore. It turned into actions. Small, deliberate choices meant to remind me that I didn't belong, that I was an outsider in a home I once thought I'd built. It started with the chair. When it came time to sit, I reached for a spot near the middle of the table where I could see the kids and be part of the conversation. But Trang's voice cut in, smooth and polite on the surface, sharp underneath. "Oh, Mom, why don't you sit over there, closer to the window?" I turned and saw the chair she meant, the one with a wobbly leg, the one everyone avoided. My son glanced at it, then quickly looked away. No one spoke up. So I smiled. nodded, and lowered myself into that broken chair, feeling it creak under my weight as the others settled comfortably into theirs. It might sound small, but moments like that pierce deeper than people realize. A chair isn't just a seat, it's a place at the table, a symbol that you belong. And that night, my place was fragile, unstable, ready to collapse at any moment. The next wound came with the food. I had baked a cake that morning, a simple lemon cake, the kind my husband used to love, the kind I thought might bring a little memory of him back into the room. I placed it on the sideboard carefully, waiting for the right moment to present it. After dinner, when desserts were being passed around, I started to reach for the cake knife. But before I could speak, Trang slid a glossy box onto the table. "We ordered from that new bakery downtown," she announced. Out came pastel-colored macarons, tiny tarts, cupcakes with swirls of frosting taller than the cakes themselves. Everyone gasped, delighted by the presentation. My lemon cake sat untouched. Someone moved it farther down the counter to make space for the bakery treats. By the end of the night, it was still there, uncut like it had never existed. I wrapped it back up and carried it home, heavy in my arms, heavier in my heart. Then there was the gift. I had bought a small toy for my grandson, a puzzle game I knew he'd love. I handed it to him quietly, slipping it into his hands before the egg hunt began. His face lit up, and for a brief moment my heart swelled. But just as quickly, Trang's voice cut through. "Sweetie, put that away for later. Grandma doesn't need to spoil you right now." The toy was set aside on a shelf, forgotten in the rush of candy baskets and chocolate bunnies. I watched my grandson's smile fade, and I felt the sting of being told, without saying the words, that what I gave wasn't good enough. Humiliation doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a series of tiny slaps to the soul. The broken chair, the cake pushed aside, the gift dismissed. Each one alone might be excused, brushed off as nothing, but together they formed a pattern too clear to ignore. I sat there, holding my napkin tight in my lap, trying to keep my face composed. Inside, though, I felt like I was unraveling. My sacrifices, my traditions, my love, they weren't just unappreciated, they were being replaced, ridiculed, treated like clutter in a house too eager to look modern, too desperate to shine for an audience that didn't even matter. At one point during dessert, someone laughed and said, "Trang, you've really taken things up a notch. It's like you've rebranded Easter." Rebranded. The word rang in my ears. Holidays weren't brands to me. They were lifelines, moments that tied me to my late husband, to my son when he was small, to the sense of family I thought we all cherished. And now, even that was being stripped, dressed up in hashtags and pastel filters, while I was left sitting quietly in the corner, invisible. The hardest part was my son. He didn't defend me. He didn't notice my cake still wrapped, my gift pushed aside, my chair wobbling under me. Or maybe he did notice and chose silence anyway. That silence was its own humiliation, a louder one than anything Trang could say, because it meant he had chosen his peace over my dignity. By the end of the evening, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life, as if decades of giving had been whittled down to nothing more than a background role in someone else's story. I smiled when people looked my way. I nodded at the right times. But inside, I was screaming. How much more can I give before I vanish completely? Walking out of that house, carrying my untouched cake and the toy still in its box, I understood something I had never let myself admit. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being diminished, deliberately. Piece by piece, they were carving me out of the picture until all that remained was a ghost at the table. And humiliation like that doesn't fade quickly. It lingers, sharp and raw, long after the laughter has died down. I went home that night, set the cake on my kitchen counter, and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just dessert. It was proof of my invisibility, proof that in their world I no longer had a place. But deep inside, under all that hurt, a quiet ember began to glow. Because humiliation, as painful as it is, can also be a turning point. And that night, I felt the shift. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not stay seated in a broken chair forever. Recognition can be crueler than rejection when it comes dressed as a trick. After all the silence, the small humiliations, and the sting of being erased, part of me still hoped, deep down, that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see me. That hope is what hurt the most. It happened toward the end of the evening, after dinner plates had been cleared and desserts half-eaten. The kids were running around with jelly beans stuck in their pockets, their laughter echoing through the house. I was collecting cups and folding napkins, quietly trying to stay useful, when I heard someone call out from the dining room, "Come on, let's take a family picture." For a moment, my heart leapt. Family picture. Those words used to mean everything to me. Back when my husband was alive, we never ended a holiday without one. Me, him, our son, smiling between us, sometimes holding his plate of rolls like a prize. Pictures were proof that I mattered, that I was part of the fabric of our lives. And now, hearing those words again, I felt a flicker of that old warmth. Everyone gathered near the table. Trang arranged the kids in front, smoothed her dress, fixed her hair in the reflection of the window. My son stood tall beside her, arm around her waist. The rest of the family lined up, laughing, jostling, trying to fit into the frame. And then, someone turned toward me and said, "Mom, come stand with us." I can't explain how those words pierced me. Simple as they were, they felt like a balm on wounds I didn't even know were still bleeding. For the first time that day, my smile was real. I set down the napkins, smoothed my skirt, and stepped forward. My hands trembled, not from age, but from something softer. Relief. At last, I thought, maybe they remembered. Maybe I wasn't invisible after all. I walked toward the center of the group, slipping into a space near my son. The camera was lifted, the timer set. I felt the warmth of belonging starting to creep back into my chest. I imagined the picture framed, hung in their house, my face right there with theirs, proof that I hadn't been erased. But just as the shutter was about to click, I felt a hand on my arm. Trang's. Light, polite, almost gentle. "Oh, actually, could you stand to the side, Mom? We'll just do one with the younger family first." Her smile never faltered, but her eyes told me the truth. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a removal. My son said nothing. He adjusted his stance, pulling her closer as I shuffled awkwardly back. The group leaned in tighter, laughing as the camera flashed, and I stood just outside the frame, watching my place at the table vanish in real time. It shouldn't have surprised me. After everything, I should have expected it. But in that moment, the sting was sharper than anything that had come before, because for a brief second, I had believed them. I had believed I belonged again. They took another picture, this time with the cousins, another with the kids only, another with Trang and her bakery desserts, each pastel tart held like a trophy. No one asked me to return to the frame. I stood there, smiling faintly, pretending I was fine, while my insides crumbled. When it was all over, my grandson, sweet little Mignon, ran up to me, tugging on my sleeve. "Grandma, aren't you in the picture?" His innocence sliced me open. I bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "No, sweetheart, not this time." He frowned, confused, but then someone called his name and he darted off, leaving me standing alone. That's the thing about false recognition. It builds you up just enough to make the fall even harder. Being ignored hurts, but being invited in only to be pushed out at the last second? That feels like betrayal layered on betrayal. Later, as I gathered my things to leave, I glanced at the photos on Trang's phone. Perfect smiles, shining eyes, pastel filters, a picture-perfect Easter family. And me? nowhere to be seen. It was like I hadn't even been there. I carried my cake back to my car, still untouched, the toy for my grandson still in my purse. My chest felt heavy, as if every step away from that house pressed down harder on the years I had given. All I could think was, how many more times will I let myself hope, only to be pushed aside again? Driving home, the streetlights blurred through my tears. I thought about the irony, how I had spent my whole life making sure my family was seen, celebrated, cared for. And in return, I was left out of the very picture that should have been my legacy. Recognition denied is cruel, but false recognition, that's brutal, because it doesn't just erase you, it tricks you into erasing yourself, if only for a moment. That night, I laid the untouched cake on my counter again, the same way I had the night before. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the silent walls, feeling like a ghost in my own life. And that's when it began to dawn on me. If they would not give me a place in the picture, maybe it was time I stopped waiting for their invitation. Maybe it was time I picked up the camera myself, wrote my own story, chose my own frame. But at that point, I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. For now, I just let the weight of the humiliation settle, pressing me down, pressing me silent. And in that silence, a seed of change began to grow. Because sometimes you have to be pushed out of the picture before you realize you were never meant to beg your way back in. Silence has a weight to it. It doesn't just hang in the air, it seeps into your bones, reminding you that you're no longer wanted in the conversations where you once belonged. After Easter, the silence became deafening. A week passed, then another. No phone calls, no visits, not even a quick text from my son asking if I was okay. For years, I had been the one to check in, to remind them of birthdays, to plan dinners and get-togethers. Now, my phone stayed quiet, glowing only with junk mail and weather alerts. One afternoon, I finally opened the family group chat. I scrolled through the messages and my chest tightened. They had changed the group photo. What used to be a picture of all of us from Christmas 2 years ago was now just my son, Trang, and the kids smiling in front of their new house. My face, once right there in the corner, was gone. I scrolled further. Plans for a barbecue, photos from a picnic, notes about Mignon's soccer games, all shared, all celebrated, and not once was I included. Not even a "Mom, are you coming?" It was like I'd been erased not just from the picture, but from the narrative of their lives. I typed out a message. "How are you all doing?" My finger hovered over the send button, but something in me stopped, because I already knew what would happen. A short reply, maybe hours later, with no follow-up, or worse, silence. So I deleted the message, set the phone down, and sat in the stillness of my empty kitchen. The isolation spread in small ways, too. I stopped getting asked about holiday menus. I wasn't invited when they visited extended family. Even neighbors started to notice. One asked me, "Haven't seen you with your family much lately? Everything all right?" I smiled, lied through my teeth, and said, "Oh, they've just been busy." But the truth? I wasn't busy. I was alone. Do you know what that feels like? To walk through a house filled with memories and hear nothing but your own footsteps? To look at a phone that once buzzed with family chatter, now is silent as a grave? If you've ever felt that kind of loneliness, the kind where you're erased from the people you gave your life to, leave me a comment. Because sometimes just knowing someone else has felt this way can make the silence a little less heavy. The worst part wasn't the absence of noise. It was the way the isolation made me question myself. Was I too demanding? Did I push them away without realizing it? I replayed every conversation, every gesture, looking for where I might have gone wrong. That's what isolation does. It makes you turn the knife inward, blaming yourself for wounds you didn't cause. And every reminder cut deeper. One Sunday, I drove past the park and saw them gathered there. My son grilling burgers, Trang laughing with her friends, the kids chasing a ball. I slowed down, heart pounding, waiting for a wave, a smile, some acknowledgement. None came. They didn't even see me. I sat in the car for a long moment, then drove away, tears blurring the road. At home, I tried to fill the void. I baked bread even though no one was there to eat it. I set the table for one, out of habit, then cleared it quickly before the emptiness could mock me. I watered plants, I dusted shelves, I turned on the TV just for the sound. But the silence was always louder. One night, I opened my old photo albums. Page after page of birthdays, graduations, family trips. My handwriting in the margins. First Easter in the new house. Huang's college graduation. Min An's first birthday. My face was there in every photo. Smiling, holding, cooking, supporting. Proof that I was once the glue. Proof that I had mattered. And yet now, scrolling through their social media, I saw new albums, new stories, new smiles, and my face was nowhere. My lemon cake, my rolls, my gravy, my traditions, all vanished, replaced by bakery boxes and Instagram filters. Isolation is not just about being left out of events, it's about being written out of history. And that realization broke me more than any harsh word ever could. Still, somewhere deep down, a stubborn part of me resisted. Maybe because I had lived too many years giving, sacrificing, holding everything together to let myself disappear without a trace. The silence was suffocating, yes. But in that silence, I also began to hear something else. A whisper that said, if they won't see you, you must see yourself. That whisper was faint, fragile, easy to ignore. But it was there. For now, though, the weight of isolation pressed down harder. Every meal I ate alone, every unanswered phone call, every event I wasn't invited to, it all built up like bricks in a wall, separating me from the life I thought was mine. I was no longer just on the outside looking in. I was locked out entirely. And as much as it hurt, as much as it hollowed me out, part of me knew this was only the beginning. The breaking point hadn't come yet, but it was on its way. Loss doesn't always announce itself with a funeral or a goodbye. Sometimes it happens quietly in ways no one else notices. That's the kind of loss that cuts the deepest. The kind where you can't even point to the moment it happened, only to the hollow space it left behind. I started noticing the erasures one by one, small, almost unremarkable details that told me I was disappearing from their world. The first was a photograph. On my son's living room wall, there used to be a framed picture from our first Easter in their new house. I remember it clearly. Me standing in the middle, my arm around little Min An. Both of us holding dyed eggs, smiling so wide it made my cheeks hurt. That photo meant something. It was proof that I belonged, that I was part of their new chapter. But the next time I visited, the frame was still there. Only the picture inside had changed. Now it was just my son, Trong, and the kids. Their smiles curated for the camera, pastel tones edited to perfection. My spot in the center was gone, replaced as easily as swapping one print for another. No one mentioned it. No one apologized. They acted as if the old photo had never existed. It didn't stop there. On a shelf in the dining room, there used to be a small ceramic bunny I had given them years ago. I painted it myself, a little clumsy but filled with love. Mignon used to giggle and pat its ears when he was smaller. But now the bunny was gone, replaced with a polished glass figurine from some home goods store. The shelf looked neater, cleaner, more modern, but emptier too. My gift had vanished without a trace or a word. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe the photo was in another album. Maybe the bunny had just been moved. But then came the final blow. One evening, I went to drop something off, and while waiting in the living room, I noticed their family calendar pinned on the wall. Birthdays marked, soccer games circled, reminders scribbled in cheerful markers. I leaned in, scanning the squares. My birthday wasn't there. Not a note, not a star, not even a faint pencil mark. I checked twice, my hands trembling. They had circled their anniversary, highlighted the dog's vet appointment, even marked the first day of school. But not me, not their mother. Not the woman who once remembered every appointment, every school recital, every small detail of their lives. It felt like standing in front of a mirror and watching my reflection fade, piece by piece, until the glass showed nothing at all. Loss like that isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's a slow unraveling, where the threads of your existence are pulled away until the fabric no longer bears your pattern. I wanted to scream, to ask, where am I in your story? Do you not see me slipping out of your life? But the words lodged in my throat. I carried those realizations home with me, heavier than any bag of groceries. In my own house, I opened drawers and boxes filled with mementos, birthday cards my son had drawn as a child, my husband's old watch, the recipe book with grease stains and handwriting in the margins. Proof that I had lived, that I had given, that I had mattered. Yet outside those walls, in their world, none of it existed anymore. Sometimes at night, I would sit with the photo albums on my lap, flipping through pages of smiling faces, family trips, Christmas mornings, Easter egg hunts. My handwriting curled in the margins, documenting every moment. First Easter together, Mignon's first steps, Huang's graduation. My story was there, plain as day, but in their photos, in their feeds, in their calendars, I wasn't. It's one thing to lose people you love to time, to distance, even to death. Those losses are hard but natural. But to lose them while they're still alive, to watch yourself being written out of their present, it's a grief that has no funeral, no closure. It's an absence you can't explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. I remember standing in their kitchen one afternoon, looking at the fridge. Once it had been covered in drawings Min An made for me, magnets shaped like fruits I bought from dollar stores, notes with my handwriting reminding them of school events. That fridge used to tell our family's story. Now it was covered in glossy magnets from vacations they took without me. Polished postcards and notes in Trang's handwriting. My magnets were gone. My notes were gone. As if my touch had never been there. The cruelest part was knowing they didn't see it. To them, it was just redecorating, just moving forward, just cleaning up. To me, it was proof that I was vanishing from their lives, erased like chalk washed away in the rain. Walking back into my own quiet house, I sat in the kitchen and stared at the old bunny figurine I still had. Its twin, the one I'd kept for myself. A crack ran through its ear, but it was still here, still whole in its imperfection. I ran my finger over it and whispered, "At least you remember." That night, I realized something that chilled me. It wasn't just that I was being forgotten, it was that they were actively rewriting their story without me in it. And maybe one day when they looked back, they'd believe the new version, that I had never really been part of it at all. That's what unseen loss feels like. Not the loss of life, but the loss of proof that you ever lived inside someone else's heart. And with every erasure, I felt myself slipping further, like sand falling through fingers that no longer cared to hold me. There's only so much a heart can carry before it cracks. For weeks, I'd been trying to swallow the slights, the dismissals, the quiet erasures. I told myself, be patient, be graceful. They don't mean it. But the truth is, they did mean it. And one night, they made sure I understood exactly where I stood. It was during a family gathering not long after Easter. Trang had invited friends over, people from her work, neighbors from down the street. The house buzzed with chatter and laughter, glasses clinking, children running underfoot. I sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, hands folded in my lap, trying not to take up too much space. I wanted to help, to offer something, but every time I stood, Trang waved me down. "Relax, Mom. We've got it covered." At first, I tried to take her words as kindness, but the look in her eyes told another story. It wasn't care. It was dismissal. Then came the moment that broke me. Someone asked about the table settings. Elegant, pastel, perfectly arranged. Trang laughed, tossing her hair back, and said, "I do it all myself. I swear if it weren't for me, this house would fall apart." Her friends laughed, nodded in admiration. My son raised his glass in agreement. I opened my mouth, ready to remind them that I had spent decades holding this family together, that these traditions were mine long before she stepped into the picture. But before a word left my lips, Trang spoke louder, cutting right over me. "Oh, don't listen to her. She doesn't really understand this modern stuff." The room laughed. I froze. Heat rushed to my face. My words died in my throat, drowned out by laughter that stung sharper than any slap. Useless. That's what I heard in her tone, even if she didn't use the word. And maybe she didn't need to. The message was clear enough. I was nothing more than dead weight, a relic of the past. My son didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. He just smiled at his wife, as if agreeing. That silence cut deeper than her words ever could, because a stranger's insult can bruise, but your own child's indifference can shatter you. I sat there, gripping the hem of my skirt so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside, something was breaking. All the nights I stayed awake baking for fundraisers, all the sacrifices, the lost dreams, the birthdays remembered, the holidays built from scratch, it all crashed down on me at once. And for the first time, instead of love, all I felt was emptiness. When dinner was served, they guided me to the very edge of the table again, away from the center. Someone joked, "Careful, don't let the chair break." And laughter rippled around the room. I smiled weakly, but inside my spirit crumbled. To them, I wasn't the woman who gave her life for this family. I was a punchline. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just forgetting me. They were mocking me. They had rewritten me into a caricature, a burden to be tolerated, a relic to be laughed at. I excused myself to the kitchen, hands trembling as I gripped the counter for balance. My reflection in the window looked back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, like a ghost haunting a house that no longer recognized her. That was my breaking point, not because of one cruel comment, but because I finally saw the truth I had been refusing to face. No amount of giving, no depth of sacrifice, no decades of devotion would ever be enough to earn their respect. They had already decided my value, and in their eyes, it was nothing. I stayed in that kitchen for a long time, listening to their laughter spill from the dining room. Once, that sound would have filled me with pride. Now, it only hollowed me out, echoing inside me like a reminder that joy had no seat reserved for me anymore. When I finally returned to the table, I didn't try to speak. I didn't try to join in. I just sat quietly, eating small bites, nodding when people glanced my way. But inside, a decision was forming. A small, silent seed planted in the soil of my humiliation. Because here's the truth about breaking points. They aren't just endings. They're beginnings. When something inside you finally snaps, it creates space. Space for something new, something stronger, something freer. I didn't know it yet, but that night, as I sat there feeling smaller than I'd ever felt, I was also taking my first step toward becoming bigger than I had ever been. Still, in that moment, all I could feel was the weight of loss, pressing down on my chest until I thought I might suffocate. My eyes burned, my throat ached, but I refused to cry in front of them. I refused to give them that satisfaction. So I smiled, I nodded, I swallowed my food, and I let them believe they had won. All the while, something deep inside me whispered, "This is the last time you will let them laugh at your expense. The last time you will sit in silence while your worth is denied." And though I didn't know what came next, I knew this. Once a heart breaks that completely, it can never go back to the way it was. The breaking point left me hollow, but sometimes emptiness is where clarity finally takes root. A few days after that night, I went to the market just to get out of the house. I didn't need much. Some apples, flour, maybe a bit of tea. As I stood in line, fumbling with my basket, a woman about my age tapped me on the shoulder. "You're Huang's mother, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes kind but curious. I nodded, unsure what would follow. She leaned closer and said softly, "I've seen you. You've given so much to that family, but honey, you've given it to people who don't know how to treasure it." Her words landed in me like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. People who don't know how to treasure it. That was it. It wasn't that I hadn't given enough. It wasn't that I had failed. It was that they were incapable of valuing what they had. I walked home with that thought echoing in my chest. For years, I had believed that if I just cooked one more meal, remembered one more birthday, stayed silent through one more slight, eventually I would be seen. But now I understood the truth. I had been waiting for recognition that would never come. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened my recipe book again. My husband's handwriting in the margins smiled back at me. I ran my finger over his notes and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: strength. Recognition didn't need to come from them. It could come from me. And maybe you felt this too. That moment when you realize no matter how hard you try, some people will never see your worth. Have you ever lived through that? If you have, share it with me. Because sometimes knowing you're not alone in that realization makes the burden a little lighter. I closed the book, exhaled deeply, and whispered to myself, enough. Enough waiting. Enough begging. Enough giving my life away to people who would never hold it gently. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a woman reclaiming her own name, her own worth. And though the path forward was still unclear, one thing was certain. My story was no longer about what they refused to see. It was about what I was finally ready to see in myself. When the realization settled in, it didn't come with fireworks or shouting. It came with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I stopped thinking about what they wanted or what they might say if I left. I thought only about myself. One evening, I stood in my bedroom, a small suitcase open on the bed. I didn't need much, just a few clothes, my husband's old watch, the recipe book with his handwriting in the margins, and a photograph of us from when life still felt whole. I added the little ceramic bunny I had kept, the one with the crack in its ear, proof that even broken things can be precious. I didn't pack the rest. I didn't write long letters or leave explanations. What was there to explain? Years of silence, humiliation, and erasure already said enough. I simply slipped a note onto the kitchen table. I won't cook for people who see meals as performances. I'm choosing peace now. Short, clear, final. There was no anger in me, not anymore. Just a quiet strength. The kind that comes when you've cried all your tears and finally decide to stand on your own. I walked through each room one last time, running my hand along the walls, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. This house had held my sacrifices, my love, my laughter, but it no longer held me. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't slam it. I didn't even lock it. I simply walked into the night with my suitcase in hand, the cool air brushing against my face like a blessing. It wasn't a dramatic escape. It was a silent decision, the kind only a woman who has been pushed to the edge of invisibility can make. A decision to no longer beg for a place at a table that had already forgotten her. And though I didn't know where the road would take me, one thing was certain. For the first time in decades, the steps I was taking were entirely my own. Freedom didn't arrive with a parade. It came gently, like sunlight slipping through the blinds after a long night. My new place was small, a single room above a florist shop near the church. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but it was mine. For the first time in years, every corner belonged to me. The first thing I did was buy something I had always denied myself. Not for the family, not for the house, just for me. It was an old, upright piano, a little out of tune, but beautiful in its imperfection. I ran my fingers across the keys and laughed softly. I hadn't played since I was a girl. Now, every morning, I pressed those keys again, letting the music stumble and grow. Each note felt like a piece of myself returning. I began to cook again, too, but differently, Not in bulk for gatherings where my dishes were ignored. I cooked for myself, simple soups, loaves of bread, roasted vegetables seasoned just the way I liked. I sat at a table set for one, and for once, it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. The florist downstairs sometimes knocked on my door, bringing me extra flowers that hadn't sold. I filled my little room with them, roses, lilies, even wild daisies. Their colors lit up the space, reminding me that beauty didn't need permission to bloom. I also signed up for a painting class at the community center. My hands trembled with the brush at first, but soon color spread across the canvas like a long-forgotten language returning. I painted not for anyone else's approval, but for the joy of watching something come alive under my own hands. For the first time in decades, I wasn't giving to be seen. I was giving to myself, and it was enough. Quiet rebirth doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply grows, steady and strong, in the silence where pain once lived. And as I sat at the piano one evening, light from the window painting the room in gold, I realized I didn't need anyone to remember me. I had remembered myself. Closure doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly, like waves smoothing the edges of a stone until the sharpness is gone. For me, it came one quiet morning, months after I'd left their house behind. I had settled into my new rhythm, piano keys echoing softly through my little room, brushes spreading color across fresh canvas, flowers filling the air with their quiet fragrance. I was no longer waiting for a phone call or an invitation. The silence that once felt heavy now felt like space, room for my own life to breathe. But closure still asked something of me. It asked me to let go. On the top shelf of my closet sat a box I hadn't touched since I moved. Inside were pieces of the life I had carried too long. Old family photographs, greeting cards that once felt heartfelt, even the Easter card I'd written for them the year I left. No one had opened it. No one had read it. The envelope was still sealed. I carried that box to the riverbank at the edge of town. The morning was cool, sunlight glittering across the water. I sat on a worn wooden bench, opened the envelope, and read the words I had once written. Family is the heart of every celebration. Thank you for letting me be part of yours. I smiled at the irony. They hadn't let me be part of it. Not really. But in writing those words, I had reminded myself of who I was. Someone who gave, someone who cared, someone who loved without hesitation. And that wasn't a weakness, it was my strength. I tore the cards slowly, piece by piece, and let the scraps fall into the water. They floated away gently, carried by the current, until they disappeared from sight. With them went the weight I had been carrying, the need to be acknowledged, the ache of being erased. Back in my room that evening, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. I don't need anyone else to remember me. I remember me. I underlined it twice, then closed the book with a steady hand. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Closure, I realized, doesn't mean going back to what was. It means walking forward, free from the chains of needing someone else's recognition. It means knowing your worth, even if no one else ever says it out loud. And freedom. Freedom is sitting at your own table, eating the food you cooked just the way you like it, surrounded by flowers you chose for yourself, smiling without needing an audience. I wasn't erased. I was renewed. And maybe that's the message I want to leave you with. If you've ever felt invisible, if your sacrifices have been dismissed or forgotten, know this. You are not defined by who fails to see you. You are defined by the way you choose to see yourself. Tell me, have you ever had to let go of someone's recognition in order to find your own peace? Share it with me in the comments. Because your story, like mine, deserves to be remembered. By you first, and maybe by someone who needs to hear it too.